Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm speaking with a person who needs no introduction really, Mr. Wijedasa Rajapaksha, President's Council and former chairperson of the Committee on Public Expenditure. Very warm welcome to the program. You know, when I was trying to think about what first question I would ask you, Mr. Rajapaksha, I suppose the first that came to mind would be, what is the most recent experience of corruption you have had, having spoken about the country's experience and corruption on massive levels of corruption on a national scale? I think every public survey over the years, the one thing that it has brought out is that citizens have experienced corruption, very high degrees of corruption in their daily lives year on year. What's your experience with that, or most recent experience?
You know that I expose a series of high magnitude corruptions in my two COPE reports. Of course, these due to vituperative political system in our country that was subject to a lot of controversies. There was a lot of unwarranted criticism. But one thing that I wanted to do is, in every part of the world, especially in the developed countries, the select committee system is the most effective system to combat corruptions. But for that purpose, that the basic rule, the basic norm that you will have to follow is that you will have to do everything in committee levels on a political basis. That in our history of in the parliament, that has never been done. Therefore, I must thank, of course, all the members who were members in the COPE committee during that period, that they gave me the fullest support. And therefore, we were able to disclose number of corruptions, and as a result of that, I also must tell you that there were two cases on which the Supreme Court gave judgment, that is the privatization of Lanka Marine Services and Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation.
Now, you know, in terms of your own life, have you experienced, ironically perhaps, as you were investigating corruption on a national scale, corruption that affected you personally?
Not really personally. So there were a lot of obstructions, but I managed with all that because there is a duty entrusted to me. Then I perform that duty to the letter.
But would you think that your services were, you know, useless? I mean, what impact have they really had?
No, in a country, if you have to start to combat corruption, the basic thing, the first step is that the exposure. That I did it. In those two judgments, with the judgments of these two earlier that I referred to, in fact, that they have been endorsed by the Supreme Court also. Now that remedial measures have been already taken through the courts of law. But we suggested that there were some other steps to be taken through the police as well as the Commission for Bribery and Corruption. But of course that they were not that so far punctual. But somehow that's the people have gained. There is a result.
This is not in any way to undermine the work that you've done, but given questions regarding the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary, and certainly the questions with regards to the manner in which the Supreme Court under the previous Chief Justice operated, there are very serious concerns as to whether the two COPE reports that were tabled in Parliament were of any use at all in combating corruption. Exposure is a given, and certainly the two judgments as well, but in spite of those judgments, really, what have you seen are the ways in which those reports have been used to
combat? They were not that undermining, they were really an appreciation of the COPE report, because in both judgments they say, if not for the COPE exposure, unless that we had divulged, no citizens would have come to know about this corruption.
But do you think citizens know about the matters contained in those two reports?
No, now of course people know. What the Supreme Court has held is that until that we presented to the Parliament, the people didn't know about that. Then only people started filing actions in the Supreme Court. Now, in addition to that, as I told you, the basic thing is to expose the corruption. Then people will talk about that. Then people will think about some alternatives and also the measures that they will have to take.
You know, I was thinking about this and, you know, talking about corruption. It has been the case that over the past 3 years, some journalists who have dared to speak about corruption with certain individuals and at certain places with regards to certain processes have found that, let me put it politely, difficult to do in a country that has violently clamped down on the freedom of expression. Inevitable fallout of that is that journalists themselves, in the public interest, cannot talk about these issues that you have raised in your two reports. Now, in that context, really, in terms of public awareness, what can be done?
So that I concede that there are some practical problems, but in my...
Any ideas about alternatives to raise awareness amongst the public if the media themselves are gagged?
No, this is of course that after a long drawn battle in the country, that people also remain up to a certain extent either submerged or anesthetized. And that is why they will have to make the people aware. That is one of the duties of the politicians as well as the media. And of course, unlike the journalist or somebody in the ordinary society, I had the privilege as a member of the parliament and also the chairman of the committee. I have been given the coverage by the law, and therefore that I was able to do it without much problem, the way that the others have to face.
How long did this take, this process of investigation?
My reports, of course, I completed both reports within a period of 8 months.
And this was you and how many others doing this?
Altogether there were 30 members, but everybody didn't take part in equal manner.
You were given unfettered access to the accounts, or did you have to fight for it?
No, that I have a right, because I have a right as a chairman of the COP or the PSC, Public Accounts Committee. We have a right to summon any person or to have access to any document in the public sector.
But was there obfuscation, was there resistance, was there delays? And
no, they were trying, that some of the officers they were trying, but that's we were not really submerged to their tactics. So we did whatever we wanted. That's we had no hesitation because we took very firm decisions. As a result, that there was no much obstruction.
In terms of the surveys that have been conducted, there seems to be the trend, and I'm switching slightly the topic now to the comparison between corruption in urban and rural areas, and there seems to be the trend. Perhaps you can explain why, as to why corruption is more prevalent in urban areas, particularly with health and education, as opposed to rural areas. Is there any explanation for that?
The rural people are not involved that much of these corruptions because there is no reason, because their demands and their requirements are very limited.
Okay.
But the people living in the cities, the urban areas, their hopes are very high, because everybody wants to send their child to a national school. They want to go to the best hospital. Even if you get an appointment, you want to get it to the highly the popularized place. Something like that. In urban, in rural area, of course, there is no that much of hopes.
This is the thing. But referring back to this survey that was done in 2001 for Transparency International, it's quite disturbing to read that 70% of those polled seem to think that bribery is a normal thing to do as a matter of getting things done, and that they also believe that a degree of corruption helps things in terms of governance run smoothly. So, how do you deal with that national psyche, as it were, that feels that there is nothing really wrong about corruption so long as you get your thing done? But the moment you start talking against it is when corruption hasn't worked.
Of course, it has two sides. One thing is the people also think that the easiest way of getting a thing done from the public sector is just to pay something. Therefore, up to a certain extent that the people are responsible for this kind of corruption. Secondly, the attitude problem. Now, if somebody is living having a luxury life, having a Benz car or Volvo car and a house like a palace, and the people have a lot of high regards for that person, that sometimes knowing that this man has put up his house and bought vehicles with the money that he has, he's got money really. He has got by way of bribery or something.